When my father called me panicking about a $12 million client threatening to leave, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just said 6 words. Then let Cressida handle it. There was silence on the other end. The kind that only comes when someone finally realizes who was really holding everything together. I gave them everything, and when they gave it all away, I let it fall. Where are you watching from in the world? If you've ever felt replaced by your own family, hit subscribe. You're not alone. My name is Verena Halden, and until recently, I was the one keeping Halden & Co. from collapsing under the weight of its own history. I was 8 when I first stepped onto a job site with my father. I remember the boots twice too big for me, the smell of wet concrete, and the way his voice changed when he talked to contractors. It was deeper, louder, more certain. I thought that was what power sounded like. By 12, I was running numbers with him at the kitchen table. While Cressida painted watercolors in the sunroom, I memorized how to estimate cost per square foot. I didn't resent her, not then. We were just built differently. She was all color and curves. I was rows and columns, art versus blueprint. My father used to say I had steel in my spine. He'd tousle my hair after meetings and whisper, "You're the future, Verena. You'll carry us farther than I ever could." And I believed him. So when I graduated top of my class from Washington State, I turned down offers from firms in Seattle and Chicago to come back home to Ivydale Crest. Back to the fog, back to the same 4 walls, back to the family business. I didn't even blink. For over a decade, I became the silent engine behind Halden & Commoner. First and last out, contracts, permits, cost control, safety checks, HR disputes. I handled it all. When the market dipped in 2018, I negotiated 3 supplier contracts overnight to save payroll. When my father had a mild stroke 2 years ago, I ran the office and the field sites until he recovered. I didn't take credit. That's not how I was raised. And when Cressida came back after 10 years in Florence or Lisbon or wherever she'd wandered, I smiled and set a place for her at Sunday dinner. She had a red scarf and a portfolio of branding concepts. Suddenly, everyone at the table was listening to her fresh vision. My mother called her a spark this place needed. My father, he didn't say much, but he stopped asking for my input. I told myself it was just temporary, that my record, my results, my loyalty, they would speak louder. They didn't. I had spent my whole life trying to prove I was enough, and the people I trusted most had already made other plans. Cressida didn't go through AIM. There was no interview, no email from leadership, no team-wide onboarding call. Just a new nameplate on the glass office across from mine. Cressida Halden, Creative Vision Consultant. A title no one had heard of, a role with no job description, and a salary that would later make several department heads quietly furious. She brought in eucalyptus candles, a Himalayan salt lamp, a plush carpet with hand-painted koi, and a ceramic bowl of river stones that looked like it belonged in a spa brochure. Her desk faced the window, not the room, and her door was always slightly ajar, just enough to hear conversations but never be part of them. When I asked Eleanor, our office manager for 26 years, about the new setup, she hesitated, then replied with a sigh. "Your mother said it was already decided. Your father signed the requisition." So that was it. Cressida started showing up twice a week, then 3, always mid-morning, always with a soy latte balanced on a leather notebook, as if she were stepping off the set of an indie film, not into a regional development firm. She took 2-hour lunches at the bistro across the street, ordered arugula salad and elderflower spritzers, and spent her afternoons crafting mood boards instead of reviewing structural plans. Her first contribution, redesigning the logo. She pitched it at the Monday team briefing like it was a TED Talk. "It needs to feel more alive," she said, flicking through slides. "We're not just building walls, we're shaping emotional spaces." The room nodded, not because they understood, but because her voice had that polished softness people associate with confidence. I stayed quiet, just listened, let her present. After the meeting, I sent her a welcome email. Simple, polite. She replied, so excited to co-create the next chapter V. Let's harmonize your brilliance with my perspective. Co-create, harmonize, my brilliance. It was corporate word salad, beautifully arranged but empty. And yet everyone seemed to be eating it up. I noticed changes. Weekly check-ins became creative syncs. Budget meetings were vision alignment sessions. Her iPad was always present. My project binders were never opened. I overheard one of the junior architects whisper, "She's like the face of the company now." The other replied, "Then what's Verena?" The silence that followed was louder than the words. When I pulled my father aside and raised concerns gently, carefully, he waved me off. "She's just getting her footing. Let her breathe." Then he added, "You're the structure. She's the soul." That sentence stayed with me, not because it hurt, but because it told me exactly where I stood, what I was to them. A scaffold, a steel frame, necessary but never meant to be seen. And slowly I realized I was no longer building toward a future. I was being written out of it. It started with a missing contract. We were in the middle of yet another reorganization this time, driven by Cressida's push to reimagine the workflow experience. File cabinets were moved, labels replaced with color-coded symbols. I'd already lost count of how many hours we'd wasted trying to simplify what used to work just fine. I needed the original contract for the Ridgeway renovation project. We had a billing discrepancy, and I wanted to verify the original scope. Eleanor pointed toward the print room. It might have gotten refiled under legal confidential, she offered. Cressida reorganized that last week. I went, opened drawers, checked folders. Then I saw it. A thick, cream-colored envelope, still warm from the printer. Typed neatly in bold serif font, Halden and Cumming, ownership transfer documents. I blinked, assumed it was old, something from the archives, maybe a file from when Dad bought out his cousin 10 years ago. But when I flipped open the first page, my stomach turned to glass. Tab. Effective March 3rd of this year, Emmerich and Nadine Halden hereby transfer 70% ownership of Halden and Cumming to Cressida Marin Halden, remaining 30% to be held jointly by Emmerich and Nadine Halden as advisory co-chairs. My name did not appear, not in the ownership clause, not in the witness lines, not even in the acknowledgement section. 20 pages, not one mention. I felt the blood drain from my face. The air felt too sharp, the walls too narrow. I reread the document twice, then 3 more times, looking for some rational explanation. Some clause, some asterisk, some amendment that said this was a draft, a proposal, a hypothetical. But it was final, signed, notarized, 6 months ago. I placed the papers back into the tray, sat down on the edge of the copier like someone had pulled the floor out from under me. Verena Eleanor's voice came from the doorway. She stopped mid-step when she saw what I was holding. Her mouth opened, closed, then settled into guilt. "You knew," I whispered. She didn't deny it, didn't try to soften it. "He wanted to tell you himself," she said. When the timing felt right, I looked at her, at the woman who used to bring me coloring books when I waited in the office as a child, at the person who'd baked me a lemon tart the week I got promoted to operations director. "Who else knows? A beat?" "Most of the senior staff," she said quietly, "for contract alignment, insurance." The words fell like bricks. Everyone knew, every project manager, every division head. They had watched me lead, watched me bleed for this company, while smiling with the knowledge that it no longer belonged to me. And that was the real betrayal. Not that they gave it to her, but that they let me keep building it as if it were still mine. That evening, I drove straight to my parents' house. I didn't call ahead, didn't rehearse a speech. I just needed to see their faces when I asked why. My mother opened the door with a soft smile. "Oh, good, you're just in time. I made your favorite lemon roasted chicken. As if nothing had shifted, as if the foundation beneath us hadn't quietly cracked. My father was already seated at the dining table, flipping through bid proposals like it was any other Tuesday. I held up the folder. This was in the print tray. He looked up, blinked once, no shock, no panic, just calm. We were going to tell you. When I asked, when I showed up to a staff meeting and saw my name scrubbed from the door, my mother reached for my arm. Verena, honey, please let's not make a scene. We wanted to wait until you were in a better headspace to hear it. 6 months, I said. My voice was steady, not a tremble. You let me run this company for 6 months, believing I was still building my future while my sister owned it. Dad sighed and set the papers down. It's not about ownership, Verena. It's about vision. Cressida has it. You have stability. The word struck sharper than any slap. So that's all I am, I said. Stability. You're the structure, he said, not unkindly. She's the future. For a moment, I thought the floor would give way, but it didn't. I just stood there frozen. My mother added softly, You've always been the practical one, so composed, so good at understanding why certain decisions need to be made. Except when those decisions bury me alive, I replied. Then Cressida walked in, wearing a silk scarf, holding a glass of wine, and smiling like the heroine of a coming-of-age novel. Oh, you saw the documents? There was no shame, no apology, just lightness. Dad thought you'd take it better once the Anderson deal was settled. I turned toward her slowly. You knew. She tilted her head. Verena, I'm not the enemy. I didn't ask for 7%. They offered. I simply accepted. You could have told me. She took a sip of wine. If I were you, she said gently, I'd know when to step aside. That moment, that was the shift. Not a scream, not a fight, just silence. And something inside me shut off. The Anderson project began to buckle within 2 weeks. Permits delayed, materials misrouted, invoices sent to outdated accounts. It wasn't sabotage, just incompetence covered in lavender-scented confidence. Cressida tried to storyboard the construction schedule like it was a brand campaign, told the foreman to trust his instincts, forgot to submit the zoning appeal twice. Then Anderson himself called the main line. He didn't ask for Cressida, didn't want a marketing update. He wanted me. Verena, he said in that gravel-edged voice I knew too well. What the hell is going on with your team? I paused. I'm not leading the Anderson project anymore, sir. Then who is your new majority partner? There was a long silence, then a curt reply, I'll be reconsidering our position. That night I stayed late at the office, not to fix anything, not to rescue anyone, to leave well. I cleaned out my desk, boxed only what was mine, photos, notes, the leather-bound ledger I'd used since year 1. I left behind everything else company tech, award plaques, even the mug that said, Boss Mode On. Before I left, I placed 3 things on Eleanor's desk. 1, my keyring. 2, my access card. 3, a USB drive. Inside that USB was my legacy. All the workflow systems I'd designed. The templates, the vendor protocols, the disaster mitigation models. Everything Cressida didn't even know she needed. I didn't leave a note. Didn't make an announcement. Didn't slam a door. I just walked out, stepped into the September air, and exhaled. At home, I turned off my phone, disabled Slack, deleted my calendar alerts, silenced every trace of the place that once claimed me. The next day, emails flooded in, then texts, then calls. I didn't answer any. I went for a walk instead, past the bakery where I'd once grabbed breakfast on my way to 6 a.m. site meetings, past the florist who knew my name and my usual 2 sunflowers for the conference table. The town hadn't changed, but I had. They had built a future without me. So now I would let them live in it without me. Let them explain the missed permits, the late concrete, the walking, breathing fire hazard that was their creative vision consultant. Let them see what happened when the scaffold they never noticed finally stepped away. By day 3, the silence felt deliberate. No apology, no explanation, just panic disguised as professionalism. Cressida forwarded a client email to my personal account. The subject line read, "Quick help, no greeting, no context." Just a screenshot of a spreadsheet she clearly didn't understand. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and created a folder titled, "What I Built." Inside, I began compiling the contractor network I developed over a decade, templates for project proposals, my field safety protocols down to how we staged equipment to avoid worker fatigue, email drafts I wrote for my father to send during crises, even the client preference notes, who liked what coffee, who needed soft tone lighting during presentations, who had a child with sensory issues, we always accounted for in build design. None of it was proprietary. None of it breached any agreement, but all of it, every nuance, was mine. And now I was taking it back, not to destroy them, but to reclaim me. For too long, I had been the quiet one who held projects, held timelines, held egos together. Now I was done holding. Done staying to keep the foundation steady while others danced on the rooftop. By afternoon, Eleanor left a voicemail. "That, sweetheart, the Anderson contract is on the verge of collapse. Your father won't say it out loud, but he's unraveling. Just please call me back." I didn't. I poured tea, I sat on my porch, and I watched the fog roll through Ivydale like it always had, soft, slow, covering everything. At 6:47 p.m., my phone rang again. Maxwell Anderson. I stared at the name, let it ring once, twice, then picked up. "Verena," he said, "I've had enough." I leaned back. Then maybe it's time to start talking about options. The morning after Anderson called, I met Leora Kincaid at a corner cafe far from town square. No small talk, no catching up, just a folder between us and 10 years of restraint cracking open. Leora had been my roommate in college. She used to be the wild one tattoos motorbike skipped class to chase storms. Now a partner at one of Seattle's best boutique law firms, sharp, unapologetic, brutally loyal. She leaned back in her chair, sipping her coffee black. "You're early, that's how I know it's serious." I slid the folder across the table. Ownership transfer documents, signed, stamped, 6 months ago. She scanned the pages, didn't blink once, then set them down with a sigh. "Not illegal," she said finally, "but morally filthy." "I'm not here to blow things up," I said. "I just want the weight I already carry to have a name, a stake." Leora gave me a long look. "Then we start by drawing the invisible lines you've been holding." We made a list. Not just systems, not just templates. Influence. Who defaulted to me on deadlines? Which clients only signed because they trusted my judgment? Every vendor who called my number, not the main line. "Your power," Leora said, "is soft but absolute. It's the scaffolding they never noticed until you took it away." I opened my laptop, created a folder, "What I Built." Inside it, timeline structures, crisis mitigation playbooks, custom onboarding templates, financial forecasting sheets I designed when Dad still thought Excel was witchcraft. But the most valuable part, my notebook, handwritten, 18 years of client notes. Who hated blue light? Who had a kid in a wheelchair we always designed ramps for without asking? Who had a parent in hospice and needed deadlines pushed without explanation? I'd never sold loyalty, I earned it. And now I wasn't burning that legacy. I was gathering it piece by piece into something with gravity. Leora tapped the table. "One rule, don't play martyr, make it clean, professional, but remind them they don't own what you created. They only borrowed it." That night I wrote the email no one expected. To the board of Halden and Company. In light of recent operational instability and ongoing client retention concerns, I am formally proposing a transition into a co-equity leadership model reflective of the operational contributions I've provided over the past 12 years. I didn't write it to plead. I wrote it to make the silence loud. The next morning, I didn't go to the office. I took a train 2 counties east, no announcement, no update on Slack. Just a blazer, a leather notebook, and the memory of what I'd kept together for far too long. I was headed to meet Garrett Rhodes. If Halden & Coney had been built on legacy, Rhodes & Vallon was forged in fire, fast, aggressive, no room for sentimentalism. Garrett greeted me in the lobby himself. Tall, clean-cut, focused. He didn't shake hands, just nodded once like a chess player acknowledging an equal. I was wondering when you'd call, he said. I haven't called yet. Exactly. We sat in a sleek glass conference room with no artwork, only concrete and steel. It felt like everything Halden used to be before Cressida brought in incense and affirmation walls. Garrett placed a proposal in front of me. COO, full operational command, profit-sharing structured equity path, no unpaid overtime, no performative titles. You get a team that listens, and a chair that actually supports your spine. I let the silence stretch for a moment. I'm not here to rage quit, I said. I'm not burned out. I'm just done giving oxygen to people who think I'm the floor beneath them. Garrett gave a thin smile. The industry knows who runs Halden. You do. Always have. The question is when you leave, who follows? That sentence lingered. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I realized I had leverage. Not because I fought, but because I functioned. I told him I needed time, 3 days to be exact. He agreed. You're worth waiting for, he said almost offhand. As I walked out, I passed a project wall covered in Sharpie notes, deadlines, phases, delivery windows, no vision boards, no candles. It felt like home. Back in Ivydale, I turned my phone back on. 32 missed calls, most from unknown numbers, 2 from my father, 1 from Anderson. Anderson's voicemail was short. If you're not managing this build, I'm pulling the contract. I don't care who owns what. I care who knows how to lead. I replayed it twice, then typed a message to Leora. Drafting leverage letter now. Include client retention risk. Anderson's statement. Deadline 72 hours. No threats, no tantrums. Just the sound of gravity shifting. Away from the legacy they stole and back to the hands that built it. On Monday morning at exactly 8:00 a.m., I clicked send. No dramatic subject line, just re-ownership proposal, Verena Halden. Inside a 2-page PDF, clear, structured, precise. In light of ongoing operational breakdowns and client instability, I propose the following restructuring effective immediately. 40 equity reallocated from family-held shares. Equal executive authority with Cressida. New title, Chief Operating Partner. Binding cap 45-hour work weeks, 2 weeks mandatory vacation. Majority board decisions requiring 2 of 3 stakeholders. Written acknowledgement of my prior undocumented contributions to operational continuity. Failure to respond by Wednesday at 5:00 p.m. will be considered a formal rejection, and I will proceed accordingly. I didn't need to threaten. The silence around me was already screaming. By noon, my father emailed. Received, reviewing, let's meet. No apology, no ownership, just what reviewing. At 4:16 p.m., Cressida texted, Verena, this is a bit aggressive. I didn't ask for the company, remember? I stared at the message, read it twice, then replied, but you kept it. That's the choice that matters. She left it on read. Tuesday passed in full silence. I spent the day doing what I used to call impossible nothing. No emails, no check-ins, just air and distance and clarity. I walked past our old middle school, the grocery store where I used to copy blueprints while waiting for dinner to be done. Every corner of this town held pieces of me they never bothered to see, but I saw them now. Wednesday morning, I went for a walk. Ivydale was quiet. The leaves were starting to turn. Change was always slow here, but not impossible. At 2:12 p.m., another email arrived. From my mother. Please come to the Riverfront Inn at 300. Your father and sister will be there. Harold, our attorney, too. We'd like to discuss the proposal face to face. I closed my laptop, tied my hair back, chose a deep navy blazer, one I wore when closing the Wellington deal 4 years ago, the deal that saved our payroll, the one no one remembered but me. Before leaving, I printed one copy of my proposal, bound it, tucked it into my bag. This time I wouldn't walk in hoping to be understood or defended or loved. I wasn't walking in with hurt. I was walking in with front terms on. They had a legacy to protect, but I had something better. Proof that I was never just structure. I was the system. The Riverfront Inn was quiet that day. Muted jazz spilled from the lounge, and a silver tray of untouched tea sat in the center of the long conference table. My mother was already seated. Cressida stood near the window, arms crossed. My father was pacing tight circles like a man whose plans were coming undone in real time. Harold Peterson, our family attorney, sat to the side legal pad, open brows already furrowed. No one greeted me. I placed the printed proposal on the table, sat, waited. My father spoke first. We've reviewed your terms, he said flatly. And they're steep, he added. Unrealistic. I tilted my head. What part is unrealistic, acknowledging 12 years of unpaid overtime, or the part where I keep your largest client from walking? My mother flinched at the tone, but I didn't lower it. This is emotional, Cressida interjected. You're hurt, I get it, but this doesn't solve anything. I turned to her. What have you solved, Cressida? What project have you delivered on time? Under budget or with client praise? She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at our father like she needed rescuing. I brought visibility, she said quietly, and I brought functionality, I replied. Which one gets you paid? My father sighed, sat. His voice softened, but not his stance. You've always been reliable, Verena, but that doesn't automatically entitle you to ownership. No, I agreed, but value should. I slid a second document across the table. It was a statement signed by Maxwell Anderson himself. Should Verena Halden no longer be involved in my firm's projects, Anderson Construction will withdraw current and future contracts with Halden and Coney. Harold adjusted his glasses. This changes things. My father looked down, hands folded, jaw set. You're threatening to take the company down, he said. No, I replied. You did that the day you handed it to someone who didn't know how to hold it. There was a long silence. Then, for the first time since I walked in, Cressida sat. She didn't speak, just sat, and that silence, it said more than any speech could have. Then she looked at me, and for the first time, there was no performance in her eyes, no poetic softness, no curated sadness, just fatigue. I didn't ask to lead this place, she said. I thought I could grow into it. But everything here already had your fingerprints, the clients, the systems, the rhythm. She looked down at her hands. I tried to look like leadership. You were it. My father looked at her, for once truly looked, not at her charm, not at the image he thought he could shape into leadership, but at the cracks. He turned to Harold. What's the most legally sound compromise we can reach today? Harold folded his hands over the proposal. I suggest we draft a revised agreement reflecting operational contribution and client risk. You maintain advisory presence. Cressida retains creative rights, but the operational lead and share goes to Verena. My father's jaw tightened. 35%, he said. Shared voting rights. We keep 30. She holds 35. Cressida gets the rest. I didn't hesitate. No, he blinked. I get 40. You and Mom can keep 25 between you. Cressida keeps 35. Majority votes require 2 of the 3 of us. That gives you control. No, I replied. It gives the company stability, and it gives the people doing the work the authority to lead it. He opened his mouth, but it was Cressida who spoke. I'll agree. We both turned to her. I'm good at ideas, she said, not execution. Verena's been carrying the bones of this place while I decorated the walls. Her voice didn't tremble. She wasn't embarrassed, just honest. I don't want to fight anymore. And in that moment, I believed her. Because she didn't say it like a peace offering. She said it like someone exhausted by pretending. My father's face was unreadable, a lifetime of command resisting its final surrender. But then he nodded. Fine. Harold pulled a draft from his briefcase. He'd come prepared. He always did. We signed 1 page, 3 signatures. Mine was last. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Not because I was nervous. Because I knew what I was reclaiming. When we stood, my mother hugged me. This time I didn't pull away. Outside, the fog had finally cleared. The river glittered cold and clean beneath October light. Cressida walked with me to the parking lot. Do you think we'll ever actually work like a team? I don't know yet, I said. She nodded, didn't push. I'll try, she said simply, and for the first time, I believed her. That night, I didn't open my laptop, didn't check my phone. I poured a glass of wine, lit a single lamp on the porch, and sat with the quiet. Not holding anything up, not fixing, just being. And in that stillness, I realized I was never scaffolding. I was the frame. I was the structure. And now I was also the one holding the pen. A month later, I walked back into Halden & Co., not as a daughter, not as a silent second in command, but as a named partner with Key's voice and equity in hand. The reception desk looked the same, so did the carpet, but everything felt recalibrated. Eleanor greeted me with the kind of smile that says, I saw everything, and I'm glad you didn't let it drown you. We didn't need to speak about it. I just said good morning. She just said your new office is ready. They didn't give me my father's office. I didn't ask for it. Instead, I had a corner space overlooking the west side of Ivydale, where the construction yard met the hills, where things were built, tested, revised, just like me. I hung no family photos, only a single framed quote I'd written on a napkin years ago. Be the frame, they'll remember when it cracks. Cressida stayed on. True to her word, she let go of power gracefully. She focused on client relations, media, visual identity. We met every Thursday at 10 for a standing check-in. No dramatics, no passive aggression. Some days we actually laughed. Some days we just worked. But she no longer tried to narrate the room, and I no longer had to mute myself to keep it calm. My father still came by once a week. He'd linger in the break room longer than necessary, ask about projects he no longer approved. He didn't say much, but I saw the recognition behind his eyes. He had underestimated me, and now he didn't know how to apologize. I didn't need him to. He had already ceded the one thing that mattered more than words control. Anderson renewed his contract, then referred 3 new clients within the month. Garrett Rhodes emailed once. A congratulation and a half-serious offer to buy us out in 5 years. I replied, appreciate the flattery, not the timing. Then deleted it. Leora visited Ivydale and made me promise to take actual vacations. I scheduled 2. One of them stuck. I went to coastal Oregon, rented a cabin with no Wi-Fi, brought a blank notebook and a bottle of red wine, wrote not for business, but for breath. I started seeing someone, a structural engineer from a Portland project years ago. He remembered that I'd made sure his crew got hot coffee during a winter build. Said it told him everything he needed to know about who I was. We don't talk about my family much, and that I've realized is its own kind of freedom. The company changed. We implemented weekly sanity hours, cut Friday meetings in half. Every employee got one paid reset day per quarter, no emails, no explanations. And productivity up 18%. Because when people feel seen, they don't need to prove they belong, they just build. My mother still invites me to Sunday dinners. Some weeks I go, some I don't. The table isn't the same, but maybe it's not supposed to be. Maybe the version of family that was built on silence and hierarchy needed to break before anything honest could grow from it. I don't believe in revenge. Not anymore. It's too small, too temporary. What I believe in is weight. The weight of showing up. The weight of saying no. The weight of holding still when someone tries to replace you in the very room you helped build. And the most powerful thing is letting the silence speak while they realize you were the structure all along. So here's what I've learned. Never confuse being needed with being respected. Never assume loyalty guarantees legacy. And never ever believe that the person who speaks louder is the one who holds the room. Sometimes the most lasting power comes from the one who didn't fight for the spotlight, but rewired the building when no one else was watching. I didn't burn the company. I just stepped away and let them see who could hold it up once I was gone. Turns out they couldn't. What would you have done in my place? Would you have walked away forever or claimed what you had already earned? Drop your vote below. Share your story if you've ever been pushed out of something you helped build. And if this hit home, subscribe for more real stories like mine. Sometimes the loudest justice is simply standing your ground and letting the silence do the rest.